Then the poll taxes maybe didn't get too popular, so they had literacy tests. They were always coming up with new ideas. They were quite bright people in the South there, the racists. They said, okay, of course you come out of very bad schools, very poor, inferior schools and everything. You may not have much of an education. You want to vote? That's fine. Here, read this section from the Constitution of the United States. And most of them couldn't do that, so then they couldn't vote that way. So these things had been going on, and then the blacks in the South, coming out of Rosa Parks, the NAACP, starting up all of the various measures to improve conditions, Martin Luther King coming along, saying we have to do something about this, and they started trying, integrated the buses and the schools. In 1954, the schools were integrated in the South, but blacks were still being kept from voting. Well, that's the major power that a person has in America, to go to the polls and be allowed to vote. And so consequently, the blacks, the educated blacks, wanted to do something about this. Martin Luther King started the movement and then got involved in violence. And the movement, you know, was completely nonviolent. Completely nonviolent. It was based on Mohandas Gandhi. Mohandas Gandhi's work in freeing India from England. Freeing India. England, a major power in the world, and India, relatively powerless, and yet he was able to get independence for India from England. How? By his nonviolent movement. And Martin Luther King read about that, everything reverberated with him. He decided he would use that same method. So anybody who would go to the South, if you wanted to go and participate, first thing they would have to do is train you to be able to do that. You know, that if somebody called you a dirty name, whatever that dirty name is, I could repeat some of them here, I'm not going to do that. You don't react to that. If they talk about your mother and some others, you know, you don't react to that, whatever it is. If they want to throw things at you, if they hit you, you do not fight back. Very unnatural kind of thing. But it's the nonviolent movement. Well, you were trained to do that, and then when you would get somewhere, you would get into the South where you have to face it. It's tough. It's tough to actually do that. But here I was back in San Francisco working in the junior high school, and at the time, about the middle of March, my sister died in New York. And I wanted to do something. I was married. I had 4 children, as was mentioned here. Linda was the eldest of the 4 children. My wife was at home. My first wife was at home with them. But I just had to do something about, first, my sister dying. I didn't want to go to her funeral. I wanted to do something meaningful. And so I decided to do a living memorial for my sister by going to Selma, Alabama. And one of the people that I checked with, I wanted to check with some people who were smarter than me about this, and so I called Rabbi Herbert Morris. And I said, Rabbi, he was, you know, my lifelong rabbi, actually. We still miss him today. But I asked him, I said, what do you think about this, Rabbi? Would that be appropriate for me to take off time from school and go to the South and, you know, as a living memorial for my sister? He said it would be most appropriate. That would be one of the best uses you could make of that time. And then I talked to the principal at my school. He said, I'll back you up all the way on it. So I went home and talked to Berna. And the thing I was wishing that she would have come today. I invited her, because I wanted to know what she was thinking at the time. She never objected. Here I was going to leave. I was going to leave a relatively young mother with 4 young children and go off to a battleground where people, just a few days before, had been involved with this Pettus Bridge business and the violence and everything. She didn't object. And so I went. And I wanted to go, of course, and I had made no reservations. How would you go if you wanted to go right at this moment? You wanted to go to Alabama or to Atlanta or to participate in something. Who would you go and stay with? Who would you talk to? Well, Rabbi Morris had told me, Irv, I happen to know of 5 rabbis from the Bay Area who are going to be going. And I think I can arrange for you to go along with them as a representative of our temple. Because these were rabbis, they were ministers, they were men of God, and I was just a school teacher. You know, he says, I think I can arrange it, and then he did that. So I would actually go along with the 5 rabbis as a layperson representing the Social Action Committee of our congregation. And Rabbi Morris even went ahead, and later on, he arranged to have my airfare refunded. He had the temple pay for the airfare for it, because whatever the money was, it was a lot of money when you're raising 4 kids and they're growing up and they're eating and doing all those things. I just want to mention there was the rabbis were Rabbi Raskin, Rabbi Weinberg, Rabbi Teitelbaum, Rabbi Berman, and Rabbi Gumbeiner. And Rabbi Gumbeiner was one of the most interesting in the group because he was the oldest one in the group. And he had been a rabbi in Selma, Alabama in the 1930s, Rabbi Joseph Gumbeiner. And he was at the time that this took place in 1965, he was a rabbi at University of California at Berkeley, at Hillel Foundation over there. And so he was the most mature and the wisest and all that kind of stuff. And he was determined to go ahead, with this, and he came along, Rabbi Gumbeiner. And one other connection there that was very interesting, I thought, was that since he had been in Selma, Alabama, he knew people there, and he kind of kept in touch with things. And he knew the man who was the rabbi there at the present time. He knew him by name. He had heard of him. And he was determined that, that if he went to Selma, Alabama, he would get in touch with this man and get in touch with the rabbi. And the rabbi's name was Lothar Lubash. Lothar Lubash. Well, when we got to Selma, Rabbi Gumbeiner tried to contact him, but what happened was exactly the same thing as happened with all the other power structure. The white power structure in the South refused to meet with us, refused to meet with anybody. They wouldn't meet with Martin Luther King. I guess if Jesus had come down, they wouldn't have met with him. They completely isolated themselves. The only contact that we ever had, was with the sheriffs, with the police, with the Ku Klux Klan members who were in police uniforms, with their guns and their threats and their brutality and all that. But we never were able to meet with any of the power structure, including that rabbi. And what you can figure out later is they were really afraid. If you were living in a situation, if you were living in Nazi Germany and you were opposed to what Hitler was doing, I don't think you would go around public and say that you opposed him, because you wouldn't be around for very long. You'd either have to sneak out of the country or do something else. So this is the situation that they were in, as I saw it. And so we never had any contact with any of them. Now, I kept the only notes that I didn't take a camera along, but I did keep some notes here, and I had a little pocketbook with me, and I have never really presented this to anybody. Nobody has ever heard these notes here, but it's in my handwriting from that period, from 1965, and I just wanted to read to you. I am scared, I wrote down. I've been frightened since leaving San Francisco. It seems like I'm going into another world, one of hatred and violence, and I abhor both. I wonder why I am going, but I know that I want to and that I must. Now, I asked Rabbi Gumbeiner, I have notes down here, I asked Rabbi Gumbeiner whether our trip to Selma was comparable to Nazi Germany in the 1930s. He replied, no, it's different. The Southern whites don't practice genocide, nor do they advocate it. They never advocated genocide because that would be eliminating the workforce that they had there. And I thought that it seemed to me a rather small difference, but that was something that I wrote down right at the time, and I thought it was very meaningful. Well, when we arrived in Selma, Alabama, and the arrangements had all been made, as I say, by the 5 rabbis, there was no place to stay. The hotels wouldn't put you up because they knew who we were. They knew we were coming from other places. They knew that we were troublemakers. See, we're called agitators or troublemakers. We're coming to stir them up, like the agitator on your washing machine stirs up the clothes and everything. And they didn't really want us there, so they avoided us, and we had to stay with black families. Arrangements had been made for us to stay with black families, which is what we did. So for the time that we were there, the week that we were there in Selma, we were either sleeping in a black family's home, and they were very happy to have us. They were just tickled, or we were in jail. It was one or the other. There was nothing in between. They had made plans. They had made plans for us. Now, Martin Luther King was the head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the South, coming out of Atlanta. And he, as we all know, was a very smart man. They already had plans for us. They knew we were coming, and there were 39 ministers coming from different parts of the country. And we were 5 plus me from San Francisco. And what they had wanted to do, they had tried marching before, and the people who were doing it, largely blacks, had been beaten up and assaulted, and the dogs were turned on them.